As we've seen the fiercest night of drone attacks in both Ukraine and Russia since the start of the conflict, each targeting the other. We're hearing from Vladimir Zelensky today saying that Moscow had launched more than 145 drones across separate Ukrainian towns and cities. Also intense series of attacks in the south of Moscow as well. Alarms ringing since the morning. Information not clear. We're told that both of them in airports around Moscow were closed for a number of hours, but not clear on damage there. Let's try and get some clarity from Kyiv, though. Let's talk to Emmanuelle Chaze, our correspondent there. Great to talk to you tonight, Emmanuelle. First of all, let's start with, because there are a lot of developments from Ukraine, let's start with the attacks in the last 24 hours.
Good evening, Gavin. Well, indeed, there's been another drone attack and another wave of drones that swarmed above Ukraine. It's over 100 drones. Like, we are used to having dozens of drones launched at the country every night. It's been such attacks have been increasing over the past 2 months. And just to give you an idea, for the sole month of October, there were 2,000 kamikaze drones launched against Ukraine, and not all of them crash on the target. However, when they are intercepted, even when they fall, their debris can damage houses, can kill people, and that's really, a wave of terror that is just, over Ukraine every night. We have several alerts, so you can imagine also how the population is dealing with that. And today we had the news of a drone attack, Ukrainian drone attack against Moscow. Over 70 drones, says the Russian Ministry of Defense, were launched against the Russian capital. The damage is still being established. The airports have apparently closed for a number of hours. And this, regardless of the number of drones that Ukraine sent at Russia, this shows us, Gavin, that Ukraine also doesn't wait to have long-range weapons or authorizations to strike deep into Russia. It can do it by itself. It can do it with its own drones, long-range drones that it throws at Russia as well. Usually we see those strikes that are happening that don't necessarily make the news, but they are happening against oil refineries, against ammunition depots, sometimes really deep into Russian territory. And this is important for Ukraine, because when an ammunition depot just bursts in flames, that means that there will be delays on the front line for Russian soldiers to get those ammunitions, to get new equipment. And the same goes also for oil refinery. If Russia doesn't manage to deliver the oil to countries still buying from it, then it cannot fuel its war effort either. So those strikes are highly relevant for Ukraine. And the strikes against Moscow, it shows that Kyiv can retaliate with its own means as well, when Russia has been doing the same for over 2.5 years and at a much bigger scale.
It's kind of breathtaking, Emmanuelle, isn't it? The level of strikes that Ukraine are dealing with. I think we were hearing from Vladimir Zelensky talk about more than 2,000 drone strikes during October. Also very interesting what's coming from the UK today, because there is this lack of transparency coming from exactly how many losses Russia is suffering. But the British Chief of Defence Staff, Sir Tony Radakin, let's take a listen to what he was saying was Russia paying an extraordinary price.
Russia is paying an extraordinary price for Putin's illegal invasion. So October was the worst casualty figures for Russia so far. On average, over 1,500 people either killed or wounded every single day.
Every day?
Every single day. And that is for tiny increments of land.
I mean, that is astounding, Emmanuelle. 1,500 soldiers a day. Given that you've been travelling, speaking on the front line, speaking in Kyiv to people, does that resound with you from conversations that you've had, just the amount that Russian troops have been suffering in recent weeks?
Well, we know since the beginning of the war, since 2014 even, we know that Russia's priority is not to preserve lives of its soldiers or of anybody else. So those figures are staggering. They are very scary, but in fact they are not surprising at all. When you talk to soldiers who come back from the zero line, they tell you about piles of bodies, of lifeless bodies of soldiers, Russian soldiers that are being sent in assaults that are often desperate. But Russia continues to advance because it has an extra manpower. So even if it sends 10 men and 9 will die, there will be 1 that will survive, and they will send another wave of 10 men and another one will survive, and that will be two, and they will wait for the next one. And this is how Russia advances, because it doesn't care about its manpower or about the welfare of its military personnel, rather. And we see that those figures, they are very scary for any country. But when you see the little care that Russia has, it explains that. And there's more. There's also those new declarations from the New York Times that Russia is preparing a new offensive, an imminent offensive in Kursk Oblast with 50,000 men that they managed to gather, apparently without taking them from the Eastern Front. So maybe this is due to the presence of North Korean soldiers, or because they also simply brought men from the rear there. But we see that manpower is not something Russia is worrying about right now, at least not the welfare of its manpower. This comes as no surprise here from Kyiv.
Very interesting, and it explains very well just that the pressure Ukrainian forces are dealing with continuously, that very slowly shifting front line that Russia says it has advantage to some degree, but that will explain in the level of losses. And also you talk about that New York Times piece, 50,000 Russian, North Korean troops expected to take part, the quoting that they would take part, as you suggested, not in the east, but this counteroffensive to take back Kursk, citing Ukrainian officials. What do you make of that in terms of timing? Are you hearing any more about what is actually going on there in Kursk right now?
Well, it was expected that there would be some sort of counteroffensive in Kursk region, of course. We have to keep in mind that it's been 3 months that Russia hasn't managed to regain the territory. So this shows a certain weakness in that area of the front line, even if the situation, of course, is very tense and there's been very, very heavy fighting. That's not to say that nothing happens there, but simply when you see the manpower of Russia that hasn't managed to push back Ukraine so far, this is not a sign of strength. For sure. That being said, the situation is also very, very tense for Ukrainian forces in the eastern part of the country. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, acknowledged it several times, including yesterday. He was alluding to the situation in Kurakhove, in Donetsk Oblast, where the situation is very difficult for Ukrainian soldiers, also suffering heavy losses there, with Russia closing in there and continuing its advances. We can imagine that Russia really wants to conquer as much territory as possible, so it has the better terms, the best terms possible, should a discussion take place when it comes to territorial concessions. But no matter what any advisor of President-elect Trump says regarding concessions, regarding territory that may or may not be lost, this is not something that Ukraine is ready to consider at this stage, no matter how exhausted the country is, no matter the price that is being paid in blood by Ukrainians right now. They still stick to their territory, to a territory that is theirs according to international law.
Emmanuelle, great context as always and clarity. Emmanuelle Chaze, our correspondent in Kyiv.